You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 185. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Do you ever set a big goal for yourself? A goal for your practice, one that brings you closer to leadership. And you have the best of intentions, you know exactly what you want to do. You can see how this goal is going to bring you much closer to the goal and the vision that you have for yourself. And yet, when it comes to implementation, you find yourself falling short. Maybe you find that you get pulled away or distracted, and instead of making progress toward your goal becomes this thing that you look at and think, if only I could make it happen. If you can relate on any level, then this podcast episode is 100% for you, and I'm so glad that you're here this week. Welcome, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to dive into the question of goal setting, leadership goals, and how to deal with the distractions that pull you away from your goal. Now, before we dive in, I would love to share a few opportunities that are coming up for us to work together. The first two opportunities are webinars that are on the agenda for December, and I would like to invite you to be there with me. On December 6th, which is a Friday, at noon Pacific time, I'll be hosting a webinar all about leadership for women lawyers in 2025. This is an opportunity for you to join me and to workshop on leadership, what that looks like for you in your practice, and to define how you want to lead, who you want to be as a leader in your practice, which of course lines up very nicely with what we're talking about today in terms of your leadership goals. Now, on Thursday, December 19th, I'll be hosting another webinar. This is a free webinar. It is open to anybody who wants to come and dive in to planning for the new year. Yes, as we all know, 2025 is just around the corner, and there's nothing that I love to do more before or just after even a new year than to plan, to set some goals, some intentions for the year. So in that webinar, we will be reflecting on 2024, all that you've accomplished over the course of this year. We're going to reflect back on where you were this time last year, and we're going to set some goals up for you for the year to come. So again, very much aligned with today's topic, right? We're looking at setting goals to set you up for success in the new year. Now, at both of these webinars, I'll be talking about another opportunity. I mentioned there were a few. The third opportunity is for us to work together in the capacity. Well, we can always work together in a one-to-one capacity, but what I'm offering in January is a 6-month coaching program. It is a group coaching and mastermind program for up to 8 women lawyers. I've been running this program now for a couple of years, and I'm thrilled to be offering it once again. And I'll be talking about it a little bit more during the webinars that are taking place on December 6th and on the 19th. And this program is one where I will help you and the group will help you reach your goal, whatever goal it is that you set for yourself for the first 6 months of 2025. So if that's something that is of interest to you, by all means, I encourage you to check that out. Now, links to all of these webinars, links to these 2 webinars and to this program will be included with the show notes that go along with this podcast episode. If you have any trouble finding them and you'd like more information, please feel free to reach out to me. You can send an email, you can reach out on LinkedIn, whatever is easiest for you. I would be delighted to hear from you and to share that information with you and answer any questions that you have. So with that, my dear, we are going to dive into this topic of today's podcast episode, which of course is what to do, right? You've got these goals, you've got these aspirations for leadership or greater leadership, depending on where it is that you are in your practice, and yet you find yourself getting pulled away and distracted from actually reaching them. So there are a number of goals that might relate to you. One goal that I often see with lawyers that I work with is the goal of business development. So that could be raising your profile within your firm. It could be raising your profile within the legal community, within your industry. It may also involve building relationships within your organization. It could be relationships external to your organization, relationships with colleagues, relationships with clients, referral sources. And these are important, and yet they may not be getting the priority and the attention that you would like to give them. Another area where you might find yourself setting big goals but not really reaching them is building your team, right? You might want to be delegating more, fostering a sense of culture and community within your practice, maybe you're leading a practice group within your firm, maybe you're leading your firm. And so you're aspiring to building your team, and yet you find that you're getting sidetracked, you're getting pulled away. Maybe you're finding it's too hard to delegate. It's much faster for you to do it yourself. And so you're not able to really create that team that you're trying to build. It could also be that you're wanting to plan your practice more strategically, right? You may have goals of reallocating the type of work that you do, whether it's the specific type of work, the practice, the substantive area of law, or maybe it's the nature of the work, right? Maybe you're right now much more of a doer, and what you'd like to do is move more into a managerial overseer capacity where others are doing the work. You may be looking over that work, but your role is effectively shifting, and you may find that that's hard to prioritize for various reasons. And these goals are typically important goals, but not necessarily urgent. These are goals where if you don't do them, nobody else is really going to follow up with you. These are goals that you're setting for yourself. They're effectively leadership goals. Another goal that I should mention here as well is sometimes the goal is more in the nature of pulling away, right? It's setting boundaries, or it's being more conscientious about how you're delineating your boundaries and where you're spending your time. And so these are all ways in which you may have these goals. These are goals that will further you as a leader, and yet you're not reaching them because you keep getting pulled away. So how is this occurring? Well, if we take a step back and we look at what leadership means. And here I'd invite you to think about yourself as a leader and yourself in terms of how you define leadership. There are a number of qualities that I see among leaders that are typical for such a definition. So leader, by definition, means going first, right? So think about what that looks like in your practice. When I think about going first, I think of a person who is stepping ahead of the curve, a person who is putting herself out there, which may be vulnerable, right? If you are the first person in line, that means that you are sticking your neck out literally and potentially figuratively as well, right? So that may also involve being a visionary, right? You are setting the goals. You are deciding on the direction. You are the one who is taking initiative. So leadership by definition means that you are in front. That may make you feel empowered on the one hand, right? You get to be the one who decides where you're going. And at the same time, you may feel a bit vulnerable because you're the one who's putting yourself out there more so than others. Now, leadership also will often carry a message or a connotation of control, right? You may be controlling or guiding or influencing others. So you might see, if you have a team, for example, there may be a clear influence that you have over the members of your team. Another way that leadership might appear is also in title, right? So you may look at the way that you are described or the position that you hold within your organization, whether it's partner or senior partner or practice group leader or senior associate or some other title that conveys power on you, right? Leadership on you. And so then what you're aspiring to do is to live into that role. Now, where things get complicated is when you get distracted from your leadership goals. Now, distraction had a lovely definition offered in the Oxford Languages Online Dictionary as a thing that prevents someone from giving full attention to something else. So I think we all know what distraction feels like, looks like for us in each of our lives and each of our practices. And how this can play out then, if you've got the goal and you've got the distraction, is you go and you set the goal, right? And you find that you don't have time to reach it. And this can come up in a number of ways, and I'm going to focus in on 3 different types of distractions that I see as being relatively common for lawyers in their practice. So the first of these distractions is a logistical distraction. This is where you set the goal. and you know that there's going to be time required to accomplish this goal, and yet you never really seem to get to be able to work on this goal that you've set for yourself. Now, I had a conversation with a coaching client a while back that I absolutely love, which was when we looked at her schedule, and she had a goal which was more of a long-term goal. It wasn't anything that needed to happen anytime in the immediate future. And so I asked her on a scale of 1 to 100, right? Where 100 is like the bandwidth of your time. If you have 100% of time available in your day and you want to allocate a certain percentage of time to the goal, what percentage is it, right? Is it 5%, 10%, 30%? And the response was the response that so many of us want to give, which is, well, I don't actually want to allocate any time outside of my 100%. Like my plate is full. I don't really have time for this. So what I'd like to do is work on this goal in the after hours, right? The evenings, the weekends, whatever, which are probably already full. And so there's this temptation, right? When it comes to goals, especially goals that aren't urgent, there's this temptation to put them outside of the 100%. And what I would offer to you is that if you're not willing to put your goal into the 100% of your bandwidth, of your time, it's really unlikely that this goal is ever going to get any traction. So what is preventing you from putting your goal into that 100%? Well, it may be at the level of planning, right? Simply not being able to allocate time to the goal. But what also happens is life, right? The logistics of being a busy lawyer where people are coming to you, they have problems, their problems, at least by their account, are urgent problems, and they want you to deal with them, right? This can also come up outside of work with family members, with friends, whoever it might be. And so if you are in a position where you find yourself reacting a lot to other people to help them kind of save them from their problems, you might ask yourself if this is a logistical barrier that is distracting you from the goals that you have for yourself. So that's one way that I see goals getting sidetracked. Now, another example of distraction that you might experience when it comes to having a goal and devoting the energy and attention that is required to achieve it is internal, right? This is the negative self-talk that will prevent you from taking action towards your goals. So let's say you're in that situation where you've got lots of other people who demand your time of you. And so there you are working away, magically solving other people's problems, and then there are none. And so you finally have the time and space available for you to work on your non-urgent but important goal. What can sometimes happen here is even though you have the time to work on it, you find it really difficult to actually do the work, right? It's like everything has slowed down and now it's quiet, and all of a sudden there's space for that voice to magically appear, right? Usually it's the voice of the inner critic who is now letting you know all about the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, the fear of judgment, the fear of failure. And that voice will often have, a certain favorite saying, right? Something that it likes to repeat often. And the result there that can happen is that instead of pursuing your goal, right? Instead of taking action, you get distracted by that internal chatter, right? And so you may talk yourself out of taking any steps, or you might sit by and wait for a distraction, right? You know that if you just give it another 5 minutes, an email will come in, and then you can turn your attention to that thing that's a lot more urgent that will command your attention. Or in some cases, you may even self-sabotage, right? This is where you might create a distraction so that you can avoid those uncomfortable feelings of actually putting yourself in the position of going after the goal, which may seem scary. So that's the second way that you might find yourself getting distracted. A third way that you might find yourself getting distracted is where you're caught up in somebody else's game, when you are caught up in an existing system and you spend your time trying to figure out the system. So you might be in a situation if you find yourself looking for the secret, right? The secret way to skin the cat. Well, that's a really terrible expression, but you know what I mean. The secret way to succeed within an organization, the secret way to, get everything done, but save 3 hours a day. So there's this secret that you're looking for. Or sometimes it might be the solution, right? That you're looking for that one thing, that one solution that will resolve all of your problems. Or maybe you're looking for permission, right? For someone else to give you the green light to go ahead and work on the thing that you really want to work on. And what I would offer to you in these situations is that you're distracted because you're looking outside of yourself for an answer, right? You're looking for a solution that exists within a system that somebody else has determined. And it's distracting from actually looking at what you know, what you are capable of, and acting on that instead. So in all of these cases, you can see how the distractions are preventing you from reaching your goals, right? So if you're looking at the example of being led, for example, or responsive to other people's priorities, right? If other people are coming to you, they have emergencies, and you're constantly reacting to them, then you feel like you're in reaction mode, right? You never really get that sense of ownership or control over yourself or your practice. And by definition, if other people are calling the shots in your life, in your practice, then by definition, you are not leading anymore. You might find with self-talk, for example, if that's holding you back, it's very difficult to outmaneuver that voice inside of your head that is telling you a certain thing, right? If you've got digital distractions, we've all heard this. If you're distracted by notifications on your phone, you can turn them off. If you're distracted just by the presence of a phone, you can put that in another room. If you want to find physical ways to remove distractions from your life, you can do that. However, when it comes to that internal narrative, we cannot remove our brains from our heads. And so you may be stuck with this internal narrative, and there's no real way to distance yourself from it. Now, looking at that third example, right, if you're looking at the system, so if you're looking at the secret or the permission or that one thing that you might just be missing, what you'll find is that there is no answer outside of yourself that is better than the answer that you can come up with for yourself. And so as long as you're looking for that answer somewhere else, you're going to be looking, and instead of doing things toward your goal, you'll be in that state of perpetual searching. So when you have these types of distractions, what you might find is that the distractions will run the show, and your leadership goals will remain on the other side of those distractions and seemingly out of reach for you. So what can we do about that? Well, here is where I'd love to share with you 3 suggestions which can help you to achieve the goals that you are trying to work toward in your practice, particularly when it comes to leadership. So the first is, instead of looking outside of yourself, turn your focus inward. I truly believe that when it comes to leadership, it is an inside job. It starts with you defining for yourself what leadership looks like for you and how you want to lead. So if you join me for my webinar on December 6th, if you're listening to this podcast episode in time to do that, please do, because we are going to explore what leadership actually means to you and what that looks like in your practice. Now, if you're not able to join me for the webinar, that's fine. You can still do this exercise. If you look around you, if you look at the leaders in your organization, leaders that you have worked with over the years, there are no limits to the different styles, the different ways of being effective. And ultimately, what I invite you to consider is what leadership looks like for you, how you want it to look. I would invite you to define the qualities that you want to have as a leader. I would invite you to explore the values that motivate you, that are going to compel you to move forward, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when you're putting yourself out there first, right? You're putting yourself in that vulnerable position, but you really value the thing that it is that you are pursuing. I also think it's important to lead yourself first because you are modeling for others. You are modeling for others how they too can be leaders, and you're also instructing others how they can treat you, demonstrated by how it is that you treat yourself. So you may also think about how you're defining your goals as a leader, right? So going back to where we started, right? You've got this goal, whether it's business development, whether it's advancing your practice, maybe it's reallocating the way that you're working, maybe it's setting those boundaries. And so I would invite you to think about what those goals are, right? What are the goals that you're trying to achieve in your practice? In what ways do you want to lead in your practice? Who do you want to lead? Are there others who you want to bring with you? And what impact do you want to make? And why is it important for you to make that impact? And who do you need to be as a leader in order to make the impact that you want to make? So step 1 is to take leadership and make that an inside job. Start by leading yourself. Now, the second step that I would offer to you is to deal with that internal narrative, right? To deal with that inner critic or the self-talk that may be distracting you from taking steps that will bring you closer to your goals. So instead of talking yourself out of leadership, what I would invite you to do is to learn how to manage the distracting messages. Now, we mentioned before that when you go to work on your goal, right, your time finally frees up. You've got a pocket of time that you can go and do this thing that is going to bring you closer to your goal, but may feel really uncomfortable. Chances are that voice is going to pop up, right? It isn't going anywhere. You are not going anywhere. Wherever you go, there you are. And so we want to predict that there is going to be an internal dialogue, that you are going to send yourself messages that, if you were to listen to them, may be persuasive enough to stop you in your tracks and to prevent you from reaching the goals that you set for yourself. Now, there are many different flavors, many different messages. There are probably as many messages as there are humans on the planet. I'm going to share with you some of my favorite messages in an attempt to help you jog your own consciousness for the messages that might appear for you. So I know for myself, when I'm about to do something that is scary or new or puts me out in front of others in a way that makes me feel like I could be vulnerable, things that I might tell myself, this will never work, right? That's one of my favorites. It's way too complicated, or some version of that is a really great one to stand between you and your goal, because if it's complicated, then you don't even know where to start. You may think there's no point in even trying. It's way too much work. That's another one that I know I like. Maybe you like that one too. They won't like it might be something that you think of. They're going to judge me, some version of that. I should help them, right? So if you have difficulty saying no because somebody wants your help and you feel like it's your responsibility to do that, that might be a message that you can anticipate. They won't do it the way that I would. So again, maybe you're trying to get someone to help you, and then you're thinking, well, I shouldn't do that because they might not do it the way that I like them to do it. It needs to be a certain way. So there's no limit to the messages that may be running internally. And the trick here is simply to forecast, identify in advance what you're likely to tell yourself, because then when you sit down to do the work, when you start to move toward your goals, then you're going to anticipate it. And instead of fighting that voice, right? I think sometimes we are told that we should take that inner critic voice and stomp all over it and push it away and reject it, or whatever sort of thing we are suggested to do. I would invite a different approach, which would be more of an acceptance, to say, aha, I was expecting to hear from you. I knew that was something that I was going to tell myself, and it's okay, right? We just want to accept it and acknowledge it and do the thing anyways, right? You may have heard of the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways. It was written by Susan Jeffers years ago. And maybe that's the approach that you want to take. You're going to feel the fear and do it anyways. And so we acknowledge whatever it is, we listen to the message, we anticipate the message, and then we move forward. So you can see how this would help you overcome the distraction problem, because we're no longer distracted, right? If you think about how much time it can take, if you're trying to battle that internal narrative, that takes time, right? If you think about having an argument with a toddler or somebody who you know really loves to argue, you can get trapped for hours and back and forth over who's right and who's wrong, and is this going to fail or is it not going to fail? Instead of getting into the details about it, you can simply accept that, yes, your opinion is noted, it is welcome, it is valued, I will take that into account, and we're still going to do this thing anyways. So the distraction has now been dealt with, you can move forward. Now, the third suggestion that I have to offer is dealing with that sense of other people's priorities, other people's requests for your time, the things that are going to take away from the time that you want to spend on your goals. And so what I would invite you to do here is to, instead of reacting to other people's priorities, to define your priorities, set the appropriate boundaries, and then be responsive, right? Instead of reactive, we're going to be responsive. So first of all, you will need to define what it is that you're trying to protect, right? To me, I don't think we need to set boundaries unless we're trying to protect something, right? The boundary effectively becomes the barrier between the thing, right? The thing that may be vulnerable to other people's requests, to lack of attention, to being overridden ridden by some other thing. So we're trying to protect something. So what is it that you are trying to protect? Why does it matter to you? What is that thing that you want to protect? And then we're going to identify the boundaries that are required. Now, when it comes to boundary setting, this is a pretty complex area. There I go, right? It's complicated, but it is. I think for lawyers, boundaries are not a one and done exercise where you can say, I work 9 to 5 and that's it, right? If you have something that's really urgent and important, but you email me at 5:01, I'm not going to respond. I know very few lawyers who work like that, who would choose to work like that. And for each of us, we're going to need to decide on, first of all, what our default boundaries might be, right? Generally speaking, how do you want to structure your time? Generally speaking, where are the places where you're willing to make exceptions? I've had many discussions with lawyers, in particular with my group of women lawyers, right? I've got this amazing group of women lawyers, and this month we're talking about boundaries. In the 4 previous sessions that I've run, we've had conversations about boundaries. And what I've noticed about these conversations is that the boundaries question is one that it really does strike at the heart of who you are as a person. I think there are a lot of expectations on lawyers to be there, right? And when something urgent comes in, there's an expectation to be responsive, and we want to be responsive, right? We want to be able to help somebody. We want to be able to take on that urgent file. We want to stay late if it means doing a really amazing job and submitting whatever it happens to be, right? Submitting the argument, if we are submitting an application for something, if we are doing a closing, we want to make sure that all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted. There are times where we're going to want to produce in a way and work in a way that maybe isn't sustainable over the long run, right? We wouldn't want to spend every day at the office until 10 o'clock perfecting the document, but we want to do it sometimes. And so what I'm trying to get at here, in a little bit of a convoluted way, is to say that for you, boundaries are going to be flexible, right? You're going to want to set the boundaries around what it is you want to protect. And you may want to incorporate flexibility, but you want to be the one who decides when it is that you are going to be flexible with your boundaries versus letting that decision be made by all of the people outside of you. Because if you leave the decision of who gets to decide when you get to move your boundaries, if you leave that decision to people around you, then chances are your boundaries are going to be moved a lot, right? Often, almost all of the time, because if it's in the benefit or it's to the benefit of somebody else, they're probably not thinking about your boundaries or not intentionally trying to overstep your boundaries. But if you're not there to protect them, then chances are those boundaries are going to get moved. So going back to this third point then, instead of making it your default to react to other people's priorities when it suits them, right? At their discretion, when they think it's urgent, what I'd invite you to do is to take ownership over that and instead be selective about where it is that you are going to be more flexible with your boundaries, recognizing that this is a choice that you are going to make. So the goal here, right? If we think about what we're doing, right? We are looking at leading yourself first, right? You get to define leadership. You get to decide what the rules of the game are going to be. You're not going to be so worried about playing somebody else's game. You are going to play your own game. That's rule number 1 or suggestion number 1. Suggestion number 2, instead of letting your internal dialogue distract you from your goals, you are going to learn how to manage that internal narrative in a way that you are able to move forward, right? We can allow that voice to be there and still move ahead with our goals. And then finally, you are going to be the one who is more decisive about your boundaries, when you're going to adhere to them strictly and when you're going to be more flexible. And the goal isn't to do this perfectly, it's simply to raise your awareness, right? To raise your awareness of what your goals are, why they are important, to raise your awareness of the time that you have set aside to move toward your goals, and to notice where you are getting distracted from your goals so that you can then bring yourself back. Now, the skills that you'll need to do this, number 1 is that skill of awareness, noticing what's going on, noticing where maybe you're sitting down to work on your goal and you find yourself getting distracted. You find yourself looking for something in your inbox that you can respond to that is more immediate, that will give you that gratification, that will pull you away from a task that might be more uncomfortable. And the other skill that you'll be required is to deal with the discomfort of difficult feelings and doing something differently in situations where you would normally act in a certain way. So I realize that's a little bit ambiguous. So what I mean by that is in practice, right? If you choose, for example, that you're going to assert more boundaries, right? You're going to set limits on certain things in order to free up time to work on your goals, then you may need to say no. You may need to be non-responsive. You may need to turn on your out of office and make yourself unavailable to others. And it may feel really uncomfortable to do that. So that's what I mean is you may need to learn how to feel uncomfortable, how to deal with the discomfort in order to prioritize your goal. It may also be that the goal itself requires you to step into a feeling of discomfort, right? Again, going back to that idea of leadership and being the first and putting yourself out there in front of others, that may make you feel exposed or more vulnerable in such a way that you'll need to learn how to manage that discomfort and still move ahead if it's something that's really important to you. It's a goal that you want to pursue. Now, what will happen over time is if you develop a practice where you are prioritizing your goals, right? You're setting your goals, you're prioritizing them, you're taking action toward them, and then you start to realize those goals, then what you'll find is that you are reaching your goals, right? You're embracing that leadership goal. You're being the leader that you wanted to be. There's no longer that gap between what you're trying to achieve, right? And where you are today. So those are my suggestions. That is what I have to offer for you today. And I hope this has been a helpful discussion to help you think about what your goals are, what might be standing in the way, and some ways that you might be able to deal with those distractions in order that you can be taking action and getting closer to your goals. So if any of this resonates with you and you would like to go further, I would invite you to join me for those webinars, right? Join me on December 6th and we will dive into leadership and what that looks like for you. Join me on December 19th and we will take stock of your 2024 and get you set up for 2025. And finally, if you want to take a goal that you are working on, a goal where you find that you're getting distracted and you would like the additional support to help you move through the challenges of actually reaching your goal, then I would invite you to join me in January for 6 months alongside up to 8 women lawyers who will be doing this work with you so that you can set a goal together, right? So that, and each of you will set your own goal, but you set your goal. Then you work on who you need to become in order to achieve that goal. We will work on the obstacles that will come up in the way, including the obstacles of distractions. We will talk about confidence, authority, and power, right? And how you can be more confident, how you can assume authority in your practice, how you can exert your power and influence in your practice. We'll talk about boundaries, specifically what it is that you're trying to protect and how you can establish boundaries in such a way that feels good to you and also allows you to prioritize your goals. And then finally, we'll talk about how to create sustainable success, how you can make a practice where you are achieving your goals, you're creating the impact that you want to create, all the while doing so in a way that feels good and sustainable to you. So if these are topics that resonate with you, if this is something that you would like to explore further, by all means, please do join me. If you have any questions, feel to reach out. I would love to hear from you. And with that, I will wish you a wonderful week. I will hope to see you at my upcoming webinars. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.